We are back for another episode of Artificially Intelligent, and today I am joined by a recurring guest, Jeff Chug, as well as a new face, Alex Plotz. And so today, guys, we're going to get a chance to kind of dive into some stuff in recent news around Chargebacks911. Although I have a feeling, just based on some pre-discussion, that this is probably not going to be the typical discussion that most of us are probably seeing on our LinkedIn feeds. But to kind of set the scene, I'll kick it to you, Alex, and kind of, paint the picture for us in terms of, what that FTC allegation actually was. And we can kind of dive into it from a perspective of, what we saw and kind of what we see out in the greater space.
Sure. Yeah. So at least what the news or what's been released thus far is it's a lot of scrutiny put on Chargeback911 initially, or at least showing that they're at fault, and very well could be. But a lot of what has been going on essentially is that some of the clients or merchants they're supporting have been falsifying documentation to, I guess, disprove dispute claims from their clients, and then using those documents and submitting them through Chargeback911. So essentially what's happening is Chargeback911 is the platform that's allowing some of these merchants to, I guess, dispute the disputers, right? So, and you see there's some examples out there of these documents that these companies are making that essentially say that these clients or customers that are making these disputes are more or less agreeing to these one-off charges, and the documents that they're displaying for that are basically pages from websites that are, in some cases, aren't even their websites. So it's pretty blatant that these are not real documents. They're not real screenshots of clients agreeing to this, but they're not being caught more or less by Chargebacks911 and being allowed to be submitted. And as a result, these disputes are being rejected, right? They're not being allowed to give the money back to these customers. So I think what's interesting to me is, where does this go, right? Who's responsible, and I'm hoping we can kind of get into that discussion on this forum here.
Hey, Alex, but just to put some context to the story here, some folks may not know. They may not have even encountered the term chargeback. Right. So maybe what's a chargeback? How might you encounter a chargeback in your day-to-day normal life? And what is Chargeback911? What's their business model? What is it? And maybe it'll give some context to the discussion here.
Yeah, no, definitely. So essentially chargeback is anytime that you as a consumer yourself, right, would, make a charge potentially, say online, maybe Amazon or somewhere where you're buying a good. And if there's an instance where you perhaps didn't get the thing that you bought, right? You ordered something online and never came, or you ordered something, it was the wrong thing, or you look at your statement and you maybe didn't order anything at all, right? And so you want to dispute that. And so generally you call the company and say, hey, this wasn't me, or I never received my good. And that in fact is you're then in dispute. You're saying something's not right and I want it to be corrected. And
yeah, so it could be oh, I ordered something online, it never came, but it could also be oh, this is fraud. Somebody used my credit card number. This is not an authorized purchase.
Correct. Yep. Very well could be any of those two situations, or it might even be something maybe that you did, but it was a month ago and you forgot, right? And so now you're calling in to dispute it, but you may in the end find out, no, that was me, or that was my spouse, or that was my kid. There's a number of different reasons you might call in to dispute these things. But essentially what happens is, you go to your bank, whoever gave you your card, they're going to do some research, and ultimately they're going to then make a case to bring back to the merchant or wherever you made the charge to try to get the funds back for you, right? And where Chargeback911 lives is on the side of the merchant. So they're helping to essentially put together evidence to say, no, you did authorize this charge, or you maybe did receive your product. We have a picture showing we dropped it off at your door, right? Like Amazon does or other companies do. And what's being faulted here, or where Chargeback911 is under scrutiny, is essentially that there have documentation being submitted through their platform back to the bank saying, no, you as the consumer, you did agree to this. You did do this charge, where in fact they did not, right? And so they're falsifying claims that this was authorized where, they shouldn't be. And in the end, most likely these consumers should be refunded or given money back.
Okay. Who makes the rules for this system? Who makes it? Like I think of it like a little mini lawsuit, but it's a bit more simpler than that, right?
Yeah, so a couple of different areas, but a lot of the control is with the card networks, right? Your Visas, your MasterCard, American Express, whomever the card is through. A lot of the rules are dictated by these big, card networks, where whoever the card issuer is on that side.
Got it.
And so like the funny thing is, right, like, so Chargeback 911, like I said, ultimately, at least as it's seen now, potentially we're unaware that these things were happening through their system. I mean, it may come out differently as we, learn more through the investigations, but, in the end, they're basically saying, we're not responsible for this misconduct that's being done by our clients through our system, right? And they use an example. They're basically said, this would be, charging Chargeback 911 with these, this allegations is essentially like, charging Intuit, for tax, like for people falsifying taxes, through TurboTax, right? And so you can kind of see their point, but I think what's interesting, and I'd like to hear your guys' perspective, is, where do we draw the line, right? I mean, as these companies, start to make these processes easier and more automated using AI and other things, at which point are they responsible, right? As I stated earlier, these supporting evidence that they've shown were obviously falsified. I mean, a lot of times, again, they were screenshots of websites that weren't even theirs, right? And so these should pretty easily be picked up that this is wrong. So at what point, whether you agree or not, is Chargeback 911 responsible for stopping some of these things going through their system, right? I think there's going to be, as we automate more and more things, there's going to have to be some guidelines or regulations around, where responsibility lies in some of these new processes that we're seeing through automation.
Well, and Alex, one of the things that jumps to mind for me is the question that you brought up. At what point do you draw that line, right? And like, what I draw a comparison to is, like traditional banks. At the end of the day, the U.S. government's pretty black and white when it comes to, hey, you guys may not be perpetrating these illicit activities, but if you are allowing these nefarious actors to essentially move money through your institutions, and are not catching them, and are essentially aiding them in their ability to do so, like, you're on the hook. And so, from our chief in-house legal, I'd love to hear, Jeff, from your perspective, does it make sense to potentially, draw a line in the sand? And if so, where might that be?
Yeah, I mean, about that, Joe, I think that, like, it's interesting how these things start small, like at the smallest possible level, and then they creep up, right? So these are credit card disputes. Maybe they're like small amounts. I don't know how closely you all track your credit card bills. But I don't really, track it closely at all. And so for me to miss like a small charge, or even like if I were going to dismiss it, just dispute it rather, what would I have to show to prove I didn't buy something? Like it's kind of tough. And so the balance between the interest of the merchants here and the interest of the consumers is skewed quite a bit. Like the merchants have a lot more ability to automate the process. And of course, they have a strong incentive to reject as many dispute claims as they possibly can, right? And so, where does that leave consumers? It leaves them kind of on the downside. So, what I'd like to see is companies coming in and taking that place where, okay, we're going to be the consumer advocate. We're going to level the playing field where consumers can have the tools on their side, right? The automation tools to go back and make their own claims, to make sure there's like some balance between the two, because I could see this kind of creeping up, at the lower level right now, but then where do we go from there? Like what's the next, like workers' comp claims, like parking tickets, like full-blown lawsuits, to like really high-end commercial litigation between companies. Like you could see where the party with the automation advantage is going to have like is going to have the incentive to push an unlevel playing field.
If I add to Joe, I mean, I think sometimes too, I kind of see it as, does the company benefit from it, right? Like you might just be the AI technology that's provided, but you're just providing the software, the platform, right? And they're going through it. In the case of Chargeback911, right? They're clearly benefiting from this, right? They're a big sell, or part of the sell of these chargeback companies that support these merchants is, helping these merchants keep their chargeback percentages low, right? They're automating that. They're helping to submit things correctly. They're automating the process so there's less room for manual error, right? And ultimately, if these falsified claims are being pushed through their back through their systems and is helping to keep chargeback percentages low, Chargeback911 now is benefiting from this, in that they can now go to other clients and say, hey, we're helping reduce chargeback percentages. We're doing this, we're doing that, right? So, does it maybe come down to, is this company benefiting from these, activities that are happening, right? Fraudulent or just bad practice.
Yeah. So there's some neutrality there, right? Some neutrality, so that there's not a thumb on the scale.
Yeah, and I agree, but I also think about it from, an ethical practice too. And, while I see kind of the point of, a platform like Chargeback911, at the end of the day, it comes off to me as just kind of like skeezy or shisty, right? At the end of the, like, I completely understand from a profits or losses perspective. Like, as an organization, you certainly want to curtail the losses. But to Jeff, to your point, I agree. I think that there should be some additional tools or at least just some kind of like outline framework in place that helps protect the consumers. Like, I know the Better Business Bureau kind of comes to mind from, just ethical business practices, but when you get more specific into, I think what we're seeing is just the introduction of, more automated processes and quite frankly, machine learning or AI technology. It kind of opens up that larger can of worms that we started to get into last week. That was just really around, how do we essentially, curtail or really just put some of these things on rails. And so, from either of your perspectives, do you have anything that you would kind of say, hey, if it were up to me, I would put the stake in the ground here?
I think that like the term that we're going to hear a lot coming in the near future is human in the loop, right? So when is there required to be a human in the loop? So somewhere in the process, we got to figure out where like there's a human being making a judgment call, because an AI program or any other kind of form of technology doesn't have that judgment, right? They're just working on a set of parameters they were programmed with. They don't have that human judgment that comes into play, and so that's where I could see, being a lawyer, I can envision all kinds of like unethical scenarios where, plaintiffs, personal injury attorneys could be like, creating an API that every time that there's a car wreck, it would auto generate the complaint and file it in court, and you could basically get an AI to run an entire lawsuit like that and do the work of an entire massive law firm, but with like one lawyer, right? Now, what would that do to the legal system, and what would that do for like our notion of justice? It probably wouldn't be a good thing, right? On the other hand, does the world need this many lawyers? Probably not, right? So there's a happy medium in between, I think, where we can, accept the technology to expedite things, but also reserve human judgment where it needs to be.
Alex, anything from your end?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's even the case of like you edge on the side of the consumer, right? Like, so there's instances where, yep, clearly, like just the example that we've been using, right? Clearly a chargeback, and it goes through the automated systems and everything's like, yep, this person needs to be refunded. Good, right? Maybe there's not as many checks, but when, something goes against and says, no, like this is, clearly you're at fault here and they still want to dispute it, maybe then there's some type of intervention, whether technology, again, additional technology that's more on supporting the consumer, or some sort of manual intervention, like Jeff was saying, where we just validate some of these things, right? And I mean, in this instance of Chargeback 911, somebody could have looked at, a number of these things and very clearly saw that, they're, somebody's being shystered, like you said, you know what I mean? So, there's got to be a good balance, and I don't know that we've found that yet. And each industry is different. With the traditional banks, like you said, they're more highly regulated, so there's a lot more pressure to have some of those checks and balances. But in the places like e-commerce and marketplaces stuff, you just, without as many regulations, you're just not seeing it. And as a result, we're starting to be made aware of some of these bad practices that are existing out there that somebody needs to do something about.
Yeah, I agree. So my final question is, in terms of the target that the FTC painted on Chargebacks 911, do we collectively or individually agree that that was necessarily the best approach? Because based on what I'm hearing, it essentially has really not very little to do with Chargebacks 911, and it has a lot more to do with the individual vendors that are utilizing that platform.
I mean, I'm going to take my opinion out of it a little bit and just say, just by looking at other industries, they should be held responsible, right? To some degree. I mean, every other, banking, just like the example you said, like, somebody's using your platform to do something fraudulent, right? At some point, you're responsible, right? To what degree? I think that's probably what needs to be figured out. And hopefully, maybe this is a good use case to maybe start putting those things in place, right? But ultimately, I mean, their platform was being used for bad, right? And so there's got to be at least some sort of safeguards in place to help prevent that.
Yeah,
And I'm going to answer. I think so, but I'm not sure right now, right? I don't have all the evidence in front of me. I don't, so I have to equivocate and do the typical.
We'll put the giant asterisk like in the corner of your box.
The lawyer protecting himself there, so I should have been.
But I will say this. I say the fact that Chargebacks 911 had a financial incentive to make sure that their clients won as many chargebacks as possible means there ought to be scrutiny there. And they ought to be looking at it to say, oh, look, your pricing model and your way of doing business and your way of vetting, you're looking at all these numbers, what like a normal range is for like a chargeback win rate, right? And so, maybe they didn't know everything going on, but they probably knew something was askew there. And so if you're going to operate a platform that allows anyone to, do something like this, where you're talking about who decides who gets the money, that platform ought to bear some degree of responsibility for what goes on.
I second that.
I'll get your asterisk as well, but to you both, I appreciate you weighing in. Very interesting topic for this week. And to our audience, as we'll continue to ask if there are specific topics that you're interested in having us cover. If you're interested in participating in these conversations, by all means. I think I speak for the group here that the door is relatively wide open for anybody that wants to get involved. And at the end of the day, if you can, just drop the comments below, like, share. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe yet, but we'll see how that goes. But again, Alex, Jeff, thanks for an interesting conversation this week, and until next week.
Much appreciated. Thanks, guys. Always good talking with you.
Thanks.
We'll see you.